Hello and welcome to this session. This is Open Source Security, a maintainer-first approach to vulnerability disclosure. Hi, my name is Nancy. I'm a developer advocate at GitHub Security Lab, and I'll be talking about processes that should be in place and best practices to follow when a security issue or vulnerability is discovered in an open source project. I'm hoping to provide clarity and advice around this process for both project maintainers and vulnerability reporters. Open source is now more popular than ever and underlies and enables much of the world's most popular technology platforms. As a result, an understanding of foundational processes and technologies has never been more important. A few data points. According to All Things open source comprises the majority of code in a typical application. 90% of IT leaders are using enterprise open source, and 95% of enterprises say open source is strategically important. Therefore, if open source is so ubiquitous, so strategically important, and we rely on it so much, I hope you'll agree with me that we need to spend some time, energy, and thought on keeping the ecosystem safe and trustworthy. We need to work together to make sure that the vulnerabilities that we find that affect it are resolved as quickly as possible. At the GitHub Security Lab, our internal research of the vulnerability disclosure process, led by my colleague Awa Atari, says that we could improve open source software security by enabling maintainers and reporters. First, let me get some terminology out of the way. So during this presentation, I'll call a reporter someone who reports security vulnerabilities to maintainers. They could be security researchers or a contributor who stumbled upon something suspicious. So if we get these two personas to interact and collaborate with each other more efficiently, we can achieve the shared goal of getting good security fixes. Commonly, project maintainers and contributors are used to dealing with issues. Vulnerability reporters are contributors. Just like any other contributors who find bugs or have feature requests, reporters are putting light on issues to improve the project. However, the problem is that the usual process for non-security issues is often not adequate for security-related issues. Correcting security flaws, especially when they are not publicly known yet, is a sensitive process. Disclosing information about how a project is vulnerable and how to exploit it when there isn't a patch available yet to protect users of that project exposes them to attacks. Making this information public is similar to publishing an instruction guide for malicious attackers to use and teaching them how to exploit a vulnerability. We don't want to do that, do we? If a contributor cannot share a vulnerability with maintainers publicly, how are they supposed to do it? Unfortunately, the answer is not always the same. As a maintainer, you should have a security policy providing contact information and information informing contributors how to handle the security issues they want to report. As a vulnerability reporter, because a maintainer-first approach is ideal, you should review that maintainer policy and find the contact information where to send your report. What happens next? Enters CVD, Coordinated Vulnerability Disclosure. What is that? Well, CVD is the process through which a reporter privately initiates a dialogue with a project maintainer through their security contact. This allows both parties to coordinate and work together in private to later publicly disclose the full details of a vulnerability only once a patch is made available. Obviously, and unfortunately, not all open source projects operate the same way. And many projects don't have a defined nor mature vulnerability management process. As a maintainer, I encourage you to look into establishing such a process for your project. It should describe the different steps your project team follows when it is notified of a potential security issue. When available, reviewing this process will help reporters understand how to best collaborate with the project. It goes beyond the initial contact. A typical vulnerability management process consists of the following steps. First, acknowledgement. In a perfect world, the security contact, sometimes called the VMT, the vulnerability management team, should acknowledge receipt of the vulnerability report within a few days. I say team, but for small projects, it's often just one person, one contributor. Start by thanking them for their contribution, of course, and let them know how long it will take for you to get back to them. If it typically takes you 5 days to get back to a reporter, they may conclude that you're not taking this urgent matter seriously. Setting expectation goes a long way. The assessment is next. So after the acknowledgement, the VMT security contact gets to work and assesses the vulnerability report. So what should you be assessing as a maintainer? You should assess if the reported vulnerability is really a security issue. How do you do that? Well, to help you make that decision, I suggest using a well-known concept by security professional called the CIA Triad. C stands for confidentiality. Does this bug allow an unauthorized user to get access to information they should not have access to? I stands for integrity. Does this bug allow an unauthorized user to modify data that they should not be able to modify? And A stands for availability. Does this bug allow the application to stop working or critical features able to be out of service? If it doesn't meet one of these criteria, it may just be a regular bug. The project team can then stop the disclosure process and ask the reporter to submit it as a regular public non-security issue instead. If it is a security issue, then the disclosure process continues and the assessment continues. And to help with this assessment, a good vulnerability report makes all the difference. So the report sent by the reporter, of course, should describe the vulnerability clearly and concisely. Remember that often the security report will be handled by a contributor, maintainer who doesn't have a security background. So reporter, you should make sure your report is easy for maintainers to verify, to triage and fix, and avoid using security jargon, and clearly and again, concisely explain the vulnerability and its impact. Unfortunately, vulnerability reporters are often viewed as bearer of bad news. During our research, maintainers shared that upon receiving vulnerability reports, they experience a range of emotion, including anxiety and stress. So when I think about the process of vulnerability disclosure, from the maintainer's side, I think about a doctor's diagnosis analogy. So when a doctor has a diagnosis for you, something is wrong with you. That's nerve-wracking news to get. What makes a diagnosis better to receive is when doctors explain it to you clearly in a way that you can understand what's happening to you. Next, you will most likely want to know, how bad is it, right? Do I need to take a leave of absence for a period of time, or can I keep working? Will this affect my livelihood? What's the impact, right? And you know what makes a diagnosis almost great news? Well, not great news, but pleasant to receive. It's when doctors are able to reassure you that they have a great treatment plan for you and that you'll be able to be back to your healthy self in no time. So when reporting your security issue, be a great open source doctor. Help identify and explain the vulnerability, but also consider providing a clear, actionable solution when possible, of course. And writing an effective report and fix helps both maintainers and reporters agree on how bad that security bug is. And it helps them decide on how high a particular fix should be on the project's long list of competing priorities. To go back to the analogy for a minute, when you have a small cold, you don't have to cancel everything important in your life. If the diagnosis is cancer, well, maybe you do. Be clear on the potential impact of the vulnerability so that maintainers can easily understand its criticality and the actions they need to take next. Precisely point out the code that is responsible for the vulnerability and suggest a fix if possible. Despite your suggestion, they may decide to remediate it differently, and that's okay. Offer to be helpful, and with your security knowledge, you do have a unique background, and they'll be grateful for your constructive input. As is this tradition in open source, pull requests are welcome. Similar to feature pull requests, maintainers are appreciative when the reporter includes recommendation on how to fix or mitigate issues. Reporters should behave like contributors because they are, and inform the project members if they are available to help with the patch development or its review during the testing process. So your security research background can often provide additional insight, and that often results in a stronger remediation. So to summarize, an effective report includes a detailed description of the newly found vulnerability with reproducible steps or a working proof of concept. And a reproducible proof of concept helps maintainers verify that the report and its impact. So here's a list, a summary list of the elements to include, at least in your report: the impact of the vulnerability, a list of the affected versions by that vulnerability, the code, the precise code that introduces the vulnerability, and a reproducible proof of concept. And for extra brownie points, you can let the maintainers know that you're willing to help review the fix. Again, consider that it's not because maintainer built something awesome, an awesome component that many people use, that they have the same level of proficiency and security as you do as a security professional. So empathy and understanding can really go a long way in the whole relationship and process. By the way, the GitHub Security Lab open sourced its own report template, and you can use as a reporter. You can use it as an inspiration for your own report. Maintainers can use it too. You can also use the template to create your own and put that in your security policy, and that explains to the reporters what you would like to see in a vulnerability report. And so provide them with a template in your security policy. If your projects have a security policy, reporters can have a disclosure policy. In any relationship, clear and effective communication is the cure for conflict. The relationship between maintainers and vulnerability reporters is no different. Know that as a reporter, you can also be clear about your expectations and disclosure timeline by providing your own disclosure policy with your report. Your disclosure policy can be really helpful to communicate with maintainers, and especially if they don't have a security policy nor a mature CVD process. Okay, let's go back to the next steps in the VMP. Patch creation. Once the vulnerability is confirmed, the project maintainers will begin developing a patch out of the public eye. At this step, maintainers do not hesitate to reach out to reporters and ask for help developing and testing the patch. We've seen on many occasions when developers fix the issue on their own, then they only realize later that the patch they developed was not sufficient. It was not resilient enough. So it's important, like I said, the disclosure process is sensitive. Again, patch creation, it's important to keep that process private and fix it in a private environment. A public issue or a pull request would expose the project to potential exploitation by malicious actors. And if your project lives on GitHub, look into GitHub Security Advisory, GHSA. They make it easy for repository maintainers to privately discuss with their team and invite reporters and fix a security vulnerability within a project. So with GitHub Security Advisories, maintainers create a draft security advisory and they use it to first privately discuss the vulnerability of the project, again, with their team, and they can invite reporters, specific reporters. And they can also, with GHSA, privately collaborate to fix the vulnerability in a temporary private fork. So GitHub Security Advisories can help with the last two steps of the vulnerability disclosure process. The next step is requesting a common vulnerabilities and exposures number, a CVE number. So a CVE number is a unique identifier assigned to a security vulnerability. It's basically just a tracking number. It's intended to make it easy to search for information about a specific vulnerability. And GitHub, just like MITRE, is a CVE numbering authority, a CNA. That means that we can issue a CVE for public projects that are hosted on the platform. Projects can request a CVE entry if the vulnerability is eligible for one. CVE are important. Why? Because they inform users that there may be a vulnerability in the components that they're using. They're also important to give credit to your reporters for disclosing and for finding and disclosing the vulnerability. And for better or for worse, security researchers collect CVEs like Pokemons, but that's a topic for another time. Finally, last step is public disclosure. Because once a patch is published, maintainers have to notify users and direct them to update. Having a patch for vulnerability may seem like the end of the journey, but the process doesn't end there. How useful is a patch if users don't know it exists? Their system will remain vulnerable. So publishing an advisory and specifically a GitHub Security Advisory will alert the community once a patch is released. So since GitHub is a CNA, CVE numbering authority, when the advisory is published, it becomes available to downstream consumers through the CVE number. And for some projects, the public security advisory will trigger Dependabot alerts, Dependabot for their dependency, that will help with the legwork of notifying other projects that are leveraging the vulnerable component and letting users know that they should at least consider fixing it. And for projects that enabled Dependabot security updates, Dependabot will create a pull request that will do the update for them. It makes it, again, really easy for a downstream consumer not only to be notified, but to upgrade to the latest and greatest. Despite your best efforts, things just don't go as planned sometimes. Let's go over a few things that could happen. First, a reporter can't establish contact with the project team at all. Well, GitHub Security Lab researchers have found that the most successful way to contact a project when there's no contact details available is to open a public issue and mention that you found a security issue and ask to be contacted or invited into a private fork without providing vulnerability details. Reporters can also take a look at the contact us page on the website of the project or a security.txt file. You may also get lucky if you write to a generic email address, starting with security@ or abuse@. And finally, as a last resort, social media platforms, forums can be an alternative avenue. When employed with care, obviously, they can be useful for reaching out to communities, and someone on Twitter or on another forum may very well have the information that you're looking for. If you use an alternative contact method, avoid disclosing sensitive information until you are confident that the right person will receive your report. Another problem that you can encounter is that there's a disagreement about the disclosure deadline. If the project can't meet the deadline, let's say you set a deadline at 30 days and they need 90 days. Well, if the project makes steady progress and has good justifications for the delay, then the reporter should consider remaining flexible and providing more time. Otherwise, when the deadline approaches, make sure as a reporter to reiterate your intention that you want to disclose all the details of that at that date. That means doing a full disclosure. And ultimately, you can disclose at the date that you set in your policy. Another problem that you may encounter is the project being unresponsive. So regrettably, for a multitude of reasons, maintainers may become unresponsive. Reporters, remain patient. Don't assume that they're brushing you off or that they don't care about security. Open source projects are often understaffed and underfunded. So competing priorities may prevent teams from communicating with you promptly. So even if the disclosure deadline approaches and you decide to move forward with a publication, remain professional and positive. There are no winners in a hostile disclosure process. So the last resort is a few options, is a full disclosure, like I've mentioned. So if it's urgent that you act quickly to notify consumers, then full disclosure can be the best solution. If you take that route, it means that you'll publicly release the vulnerability in its entirety. And if the vulnerability doesn't have a known fix, it leads to a zero-day vulnerability. Another option you have is to report to a third party. So if the vulnerability is very easy to exploit and has a big consequences, then full disclosure could be dangerous. So consider reaching out to a third party for help, such as an industry regulator or a data protection authority. And if you're unsure about how to proceed, we welcome you to contact the GitHub Security Lab for advice. Other issues for maintainers, if you can't patch in time, well, again, reach out to reporters and explain why you were not able to patch in time, explain your plan for moving forward, and try to find an agreement to extend that deadline. And if that doesn't work and the vulnerability is reported publicly, the last issue, then just follow your process. Go back to the assessment, making sure that it's a security issue, and then patch creation, and just move on and try to fix it as urgently or as quickly as possible, depending on the criticality. So let's recap. Maintainers, please have a security policy for your project. Make it easy to find contact information if we have a security policy to report, and also provide guidance on how you want that report. Consider using a private patch environment using GitHub security advisories. You can have that environment to discuss with your team, and that private environment to discuss with your team, and you can even invite reporters into that environment and work on the patch and on testing the patch. Remember that creating the patch is not the end of the journey. You need to notify your downstream consumers, because then if they don't know about the patch, their system remain vulnerable. And finally, give credits to reporter for helping you finding the vulnerability, but also fixing it. And an easy way to do that is to use CVEs. And because GitHub is a CNA, we can help you with that. Reporters we promote a maintainer first approach. So please review the security policy from a project first. But if they don't have one, or if you insist on certain things and want to inform maintainers about how you work, have provided disclosure policy with your report. Make sure that you deal with empathy. It really, really helps to put yourself in the maintainer's shoes to understand before, going to the conclusion that they don't care about security. Write an effective report. Help maintainers and project team members who may not have a security background understand the vulnerability that you discovered. And if you can, you are a contributor. If you can, help them also fix it and mitigate the issue. That's it. That's all I have for you. Again, I'm Nancy Gariché from GitHub Security Lab, and thank you for your attention. And please follow us on social media to get information on how to write secure code and build secure software. Bye.